Hello, everyone, and welcome to the lecture on how to use the construction хочу, чтобы, and how to say that you want someone else to do something, or that you are telling, asking, or suggesting, or advising that someone else do something. So, as a quick refresher, if you want to say that you yourself want to do something, the construction is the appropriate form of хотеть plus the infinitive. So, if it's I want to do something, I would say я хочу, and then the infinitive of whatever verb I needed. So, я хочу читать, я хочу пойти в ресторан, я хочу приготовить пиццу. If the subject is someone other than я, you just use the correct form of хотеть, but the rest of the construction is the same. You just use the infinitive of the verb. And in these kind of constructions, when you want to do something yourself, the subject of хотеть is the same as the implied subject of the second verb. We just put the second verb in the infinitive with no other pronoun, with nothing else in the construction. It's very simple and straightforward. However, if one person wants a second person to do something else, that's a more complex construction. And it's more complex because the subject of the second verb is different than the subject of хотеть. Not only that, but unless you do something to fix it, the subject of the second verb is also the object of the verb хотеть. And this is not possible in Russian. In English, we can do this. We can say, I want him to make supper. In Russian, you can't do that. You can't have the object of one verb be the subject of another verb. You have to do something so that each verb has its own subject that is in the nominative. And what we do in Russian in this situation is we use the correct form of хотеть, for example, я хочу, and then we use the word чтобы, and then the past tense of the second verb, and the pronoun or the noun of the subject of the second verb is in the nominative. So, я хочу, чтобы Таня приготовила ужин. I want Tanya to make supper. Note that we have я хочу, I want, and then a comma, because all clauses in Russian must be set off by commas. Чтобы Tanya, Tanya is now the subject of this second clause and is in the nominative. And then приготовила ужин, the past tense of the verb. Or we could say, for example, Tanya хочет, чтобы Максим приготовил ужин. Tanya wants Maxim to make supper. Максим хочет, чтобы дети приготовили ужин. Maxim wants the children to make supper. So note in all three examples, we have the subject of the first clause and then the correct form of хотеть, followed by a comma to set off the clause, чтобы, and then the subject of the second clause, which is in the nominative, and then the past tense of the verb in the second clause, and that verb needs to match the subject of that clause. So when we have Tanya, it's the она form, it's feminine. When Maxim is the subject of приготовить, it's masculine. And when дети is the subject of приготовить, it's plural. You can use versions of either of those constructions if you want to tell, ask, or advise someone to do something. And so those verbs are говорить, сказать, to tell, просить, попросить, to ask a request, and советовать, посоветовать, to advise. And these can all be combined with a second verb to tell, ask, or advise someone to do something. And in these cases, with these verbs to tell, ask, or advise, you can do either the conjugated verb plus the infinitive of the second verb, or the conjugated verb plus чтобы plus the past tense. So we'll go into more detail about that in the next slide. For the first construction with these verbs, we're going to have the verb plus its object plus the infinitive of the second verb. And so in this case, with this construction, the person who is being asked or told or advised to do something is the object of the first verb. And the second verb doesn't really have a subject. Obviously, the implied subject is the person who is being asked or told or advised, but we don't include that. We just have the second verb in the infinitive. So for example, Он меня попросил прийти пораньше. He asked me to come earlier. Or, Он мне сказал прийти пораньше. He told me to come earlier. Or, Он мне посоветовал прийти пораньше. He advised me to come earlier. And note how in these examples, I am the object of попросить or сказать or посоветовать, and we put я in the correct case. So он меня попросил is in the accusative. He asked me. Он мне сказал. He told me. Dative. Он мне посоветовал. He advised me. Dative. There is also a second construction that means exactly the same thing, even though it looks different grammatically. And this second construction is more common in written or formal Russian. Both constructions can be used, so if you want, you can just pick one and always use that one. But you should understand them both and understand that they both mean the same thing. The first one, the one that we just learned with the verb plus the object plus the infinitive, is more common in spoken or informal Russian. And the second one that we're about to learn, the verb plus чтобы plus subject plus the past tense, is more common in written or formal Russian. So in this second construction, the person who is being told or asked or advised to do something is the subject of the second verb. So we have verb 1 plus чтобы, and then we have the subject of the second verb and verb 2 in the past tense. Например, for example, Он попросил, чтобы я пришла пораньше. He asked me to come earlier. Note that because there are two clauses in this sentence with two subjects, that they are set off by a comma. Он попросил, comma, чтобы я пришла пораньше. Two subjects, two clauses, one comma. Or we could say, Он сказал, чтобы я пришла пораньше. He told me to come earlier. The same thing. Two subjects, two clauses set off by a comma. Он посоветовал, чтобы я пришла пораньше. He advised me to come earlier. The same construction. Note how, in this construction, both people, both actors in the sentence are the subject of their respective verbs and their respective clauses and are in the nominative. So in the first construction, the one on the previous slide, you have one actor, one participant in the sentence in the nominative and the other one in some case other than the nominative. In this one, both actors or participants are in the nominative because they're both the subjects of their verbs. This brings up the topic of verbs of asking. In English, we just have one verb, to ask, and it can mean to ask for information, it can mean to make a request, or it can mean to ask a question. Those three constructions are different in Russian and are not interchangeable. So if you want to ask for information, the verb for that is спрашивать or спросить. And the person you're asking can either be in the accusative, or you can use the construction у plus genitive. So, for example, я спросила Наташу. Спросить plus the accusative. Or, я спросила у Наташи. Спросить plus у plus the genitive. Those both have the same meaning. And then the thing you're asking them about is going to have or, the preposition or, plus the prepositional. Например, я спросила Наташу о ее планах. I asked Natasha about her plans. We could also say, я спросила у Наташи о ее планах. I asked Natasha about her plans. Both of those constructions mean the same thing. Я спросила Наташу о ее планах, and я спросила у Наташи о ее планах. In general, the u plus genitive construction is somewhat more colloquial and is likely to be used in casual speech. But what if we're not asking for information? What if we're making a request? In that case, the verb is просить, попросить, and the person we're making the request to is in the accusative. And we can make the request about something, so or plus prepositional. So we can say, Я их об этом попрошу. I will ask them about this, meaning I'll ask them for this favor or I'll make this request of them. If we want to request something from someone or ask something from someone, we can use u plus genitive. So the example that we have in the textbook is Я попрошу у родителей денег. I'll ask my parents for some money. We could also say Я попрошу родителей подарить мне деньги. I will ask my parents to give me some money as a gift. Or Я попрошу родителей дать мне деньги. I'll ask my parents to give me some money. We could also say Я попрошу, чтобы родители дали мне деньги. I will ask my parents to give me money. That's the second construction. Or Я попрошу у родителей деньги. I will ask my parents for money. The most important thing to remember is that спрашивать or спросить is to ask for information. And просить, попросить is to make a request. If you want to use the phrase to ask a question, you cannot use the verb спрашивать or спросить. You must instead use the construction задавать or задать вопрос. So specifically to ask or pose a question is задавать or задать вопрос, and that takes the dative of whomever you're asking the question. So Он мне задал вопрос. He asked me a question. Я ему задала вопрос. I asked him a question. Вопрос is the direct object of задать and is in the accusative, and then the person you're asking the question of is in the dative.